Has this ever happened to you? You're walking along in the forest and all of a sudden, what the hell? We're gonna fix that in this video. Right, so let's first take a look at the player movement script here. And we have created this in the last tutorial, which is linked at the top right corner. Basically, to summarize, we have created 5 different movement types here. 2 with the rigid body and 3 where we change the transform, or rather the vector of the transform directly. The big difference between the 5 is that 2 of them use the rigid body, so they are calculated by the physics system, and the 3 others here are basically direct changes to the transform and the position. And we are saving the actual input in a vector up here called axis movement. We're basically just getting the input axis raw, horizontal, and vertical instead of the update method. And then we are calling the method, the actual movement method, based on what the actual movement type that is currently set is. Only 2 of those movement types are actually interesting to us for the moment here, because the 3 that change the actual transform or the vector are basically equivalent in this moment. We only need to actually look at those 2. The rigid body velocity simply sets the velocity of the rigid body to the normalized axis movement vector times the speed. And the move towards simply sets the position to the vector2.moveTowards method, which simply moves this actual position to the actual target, which is exactly the same as well as the axis movement. So it's going to move into that direction with the speed times the time.delta time. And now I'm basically going to demonstrate this. So if we go back to Unity and we're going to add under the decorations a empty game object, we're going to call this the Buch collider, and we're going to add to it a collider, and this is going to be a circle collider 2D. So just in this search field, we can type in collider and then choose circle collider 2D. And then we're going to position this onto this bush here, basically. So this should be 6.5 and 2.5. So now if I zoom in, as you can see, the collider actually covers the sprite of the bush very well. And then for the player, we also need to add something. Also need to add a collider. So we're just going to choose the box collider. We could also choose a polygon collider, but in this case, a box collider will do fine for demonstration purposes. And so let's actually start and see what happens. So if I start here and I'm going to switch to, for example, the vector move towards, which we've just seen, then I can move up. And as you can see, if I keep pressing the W key, then it tries to move in towards the collider, and the collision doesn't really work because the actual position is being changed constantly, but the collision is sort of driving the player out of it. And the same is going to happen with both the transform translate method as well as the direct position change, where we just change the position directly. However, if I choose the rigid body velocity, so we're now moving with calling the body.velocity and setting that to the normalized axis movement times the speed. If I keep pressing W, as you can see, nothing is happening, because when the physics system actually moves the player and the collision is happening, they actually don't interfere with each other, while when we change the position in the transform itself, then the physics system has to shoot us out the entire time, and that just doesn't happen with the rigid body velocity. The same goes for the add force, by the way, so I can move up and then in this way, and then it just stops there so that it basically doesn't work. You can see that it bumps into it like a little bit, but that's just because of the momentum that it carries, and then it shoots back out immediately. Right, and that is basically the way that you can get rid of this weird jittering when you have multiple colliders in a scene. Use the rigid body velocity movement instead of, for example, the transform translate or vector move towards. The rigid body is basically the movement that you want to use. Now, you can of course still use the other types of movement if, for example, you don't plan on having any different colliders in your scene, or not really having this as an issue where you don't really collide with anything. There are different types of games that don't really require this. Then of course you can still use the other types of movement. However, if the physics system is something that you're going to need for your game, be sure to use the rigid body.velocity as the movement. Right, and that was already it for this tutorial. If you found this useful and you learned something, then of course I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to see more of those videos, then don't forget to subscribe. And like I've already mentioned, all assets as well as the credits are in the description. That would be it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. So yeah.